Hello and welcome to I Know Dino. Keep up with the latest dinosaur discoveries and science with us. I'm Garrett.
And I'm Sabrina.
And today in our 513th episode, we've got a bunch of news.
All about dinosaur growth and development, both during their life and in the evolutionary sense. Plus, we dive into why we need to be careful when estimating extinct animal sizes. And there's 2 more books that we want to mention. This time, it's non-fiction dinosaur books. We've also got Dinosaur of the Day, Suzhousaurus, which is a large therizinosaur theropod.
Nice.
And our fun fact is that the smallest known Microraptor had a thigh bone less than 5 centimeters, or less than 2 inches long.
Microraptor indeed.
A Microraptor.
We also have some good news about our logo. We've got a brand new logo that will be revealed soon.
Yes, I'm very excited about it.
Yeah, a friend of ours made our old logo for us when we first started, and we thought it was the coolest thing ever.
We still think it's cool.
Yeah, I still really like it. I like how the T-Rex is sort of biting its way out of the logo.
Mm-hmm. Me too.
But unfortunately, that T-Rex we have learned isn't the most scientifically accurate. I believe it's a picture of a toy based on the Jurassic Park T-Rex, which is sort of like a photocopy of the original idea. But it's also all green and brown with kind of small text for a modern podcast logo.
It worked really well in 2015 and for many years after.
It did. Yeah, it has served us well for 10 years, but it is time to move on to a new logo. And we decided to hire someone from our Patreon community because we figured they would know the vibe that we're going for. And there are so many fantastic paleo artists in our community. And thanks to Tara at TNT Design, we now have a new logo. Tara has been a patron for a while and has shared some of her amazing designs with us in the Discord server in the past.
Not just logo designs, but designs for games and other cool projects.
Yeah, illustrations too. And we were really excited when she agreed to make a new logo for us. We've been working through different ideas with her for the last couple months before we settled on this design. I think we're a little bit difficult because since we've been mulling this over for many years, we had all these different ideas.
We knew what we wanted, and we also didn't know what we wanted.
Yeah, I feel like I really didn't know what I wanted. And just the changing something that we've been using for so long to something new and different still feels a little bit difficult to me.
Change is hard, is that what you're saying?
Yes, that is what I'm saying. But she did a fantastic job, and I definitely recommend her if you're looking for someone to do graphic design or illustrations. You can check her out at tnt-design.com. So in the near future, you will see this new logo as our episode art for the podcast, as well as in all sorts of other places where we use this logo as our profile image. But don't be alarmed, it is still us. We haven't been hacked. There's nothing nefarious going on. It's still us. We're still going to be doing the same stuff. We just have a pretty new logo that we're going to be rolling out.
A dinosaur logo. Still a dinosaur logo.
Yes, it is still T-Rex. It will have a yellow background. Couple of clues. And speaking of all the amazing designers in our Patreon community, we have a new patron to thank this week, and that is Miriam. Thank you very much, Miriam, for joining. We also have some other patrons we'd like to thank. They are Amber, Anna Rose, Bradley, Elrex, Grace, Luke, Gabrielle, Ellen, and Danny Hermes. So thank you all very much for joining. We really enjoy our Patreon community. We've been looking for more ways to get involved with our Patreon community and give back when we can. For example, doing a logo design with one of our patrons.
We love spotlighting dinosaur projects that you're working on. If you're a patron, you can let us know and we'll put that in our newsletter, for example.
Yep, we have a newsletter channel on our Discord server. And I'm sure in the future we'll be coming up with other stuff to work on together too. So if you'd like to join our Patreon, please head over to patreon.com/iknowdino. And if you join at the Triceratops level and up, you'll get ad-free episodes of I Know Paleo, and a whole bunch of other perks.
Jumping into the news, there are 3 immature Daspletosaurus skull bones that help show us how the dinosaur changed and didn't change as it grew up. So this is an example of the changes we see during its lifetime. This was published in Canadian Journal of Earth Sciences by Colton, Kopic, and others. And the question is, how did Tyrannosaur skulls change as the Tyrannosaurid grew up?
Mm-hmm.
It's important to know because then you can correctly identify Tyrannosaur specimens or individuals at different ages.
Oh, I see. So that you're not accidentally naming new species when it's really just a juvenile of a known species.
Exactly. The University of Alberta over the last century has collected 3 isolated skull bones from immature tyrannosaurs, specifically Daspletosaurus. These were found in Dinosaur Provincial Park in Alberta, Canada, in the Dinosaur Park Formation. The Dinosaur Park Formation is from the late Cretaceous, and a lot of dinosaur skeletons have been found there, often with preserved soft tissues. And the formation is named after Dinosaur Provincial Park, which is a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Tyrannosaurs that have been found there include Daspletosaurus and Gorgosaurus. Daspletosaurus has also been found in the nearby Oldman Formation, which is also from the late Cretaceous. For this study, they looked at the premaxilla, jugal, and lacrimal, so the tip of the snout, the bone on the side of the face, and then a part of the eye socket. Those are the 3 isolated bones. And the team compared them to Tyrannosaur fossils found in both Dinosaur Park and Oldman Formation in Alberta. They found that these 3 parts of the skull look the same in Daspletosaurus as it grew up. They're, quote, constrained through ontogeny. There's some small details that change, like some slight changes in openings and depressions in the bones, but it helps knowing these details to confidently identify, no matter what the age, whether a fossil is Daspletosaurus or Gorgosaurus in this case.
Okay. Because I was wondering, when you say there are 3 bones and they're isolated, just like little pieces of the skull, and they show how Daspletosaurus changed as it grew, my question was going to be, how do you know it's Daspletosaurus changing as it grows? And I guess the answer is because it didn't really change.
Yep, exactly.
It's more a question of how it doesn't change as it grows.
Yes. So they applied their findings to a skull and a jaw, and I think part of a skeleton that was classified as Daspletosaurus, but they found that that specimen was actually Gorgosaurus instead, and there's been a lot of debate on this particular individual. It's a cool one, too. The skull has bite marks on it. It's an immature individual. Most of those marks happened while the animal was alive, so the poor dinosaur had numerous injuries or infections. And we know that it was alive because there's evidence of healing.
Yeah, well, it's made it through, at least for a while.
For a while. It's possible another tyrannosaur bit its face, but that doesn't account for all of the injuries or infections. And there is evidence of bites that happened after it died, probably from a large tyrannosaur, based on the spacing between the teeth marks.
That's intense.
Yes.
And now we know it was probably a Gorgosaurus.
Yeah, so looking at the details in the fossils can be very helpful.
Yeah.
You have to have an eye for it, though.
And this also seems like the kind of thing that could be extrapolated to stuff like Nanotyrannus debates. Because if you know that those parts of the skull don't change over time, you can check, well, did Nanotyrannus change in that way or not?
Yeah, that would be interesting to see. Next up, there's a paper that found that living birds have high EQs, which they evolved from non-avian dinosaurs. So now we've got the evolution side of change. This was published in Nature Communications by Logan King and others, and they studied the brain endocasts of a number of Psittacosaurus specimens, so they could see a whole growth series there, because there are so many Psittacosaurus that have been found. And these individuals, they were under 1-year-old. There were also 7, 8, and 10-year-olds of Psittacosaurus. They also looked at specimens of Lambeosaurus, Corythosaurus, Tyrannosaurids, Zanabazar, and an unnamed troodontid.
That was like Zanabazar. That's a fun name.
That is a fun name. And then they compared all those specimens to chickens and alligators because they wanted to see the evolutionary changes to brain development. They found that the non-avian dinosaur brains developed differently to alligators and crown birds. Ornithischian and the non-avialan theropods, so the not birds,
Yeah.
they shared a common shape to size relationship that guided their brain development and evolution. So that means they probably evolved, or that characteristic evolved in a common ancestor.
And that's basically that as their body got bigger, their brain got proportionally bigger.
Interestingly, bird brains look more like juvenile non-avian dinosaurs. So the bird brains look more like their non-bird relatives. So that means that the brains didn't just get smaller or go through miniaturization as birds evolve, but it was more about paedomorphosis, where some parts of the brain had juvenile characteristics, although not all of parts did.
Yeah, paedomorphosis is when you have characteristics in an adult animal that the ancestor had only when they were young. But he also said that they have a high EQ, which is that encephalization quotient, which is essentially a ratio of the brain size to the body size of the animal. So that bigger brain size, I guess, was also true potentially in the juvenile dinosaurs.
In the non-avian ones, yeah.
But they just kept up that big proportional brain size as they got older.
It served the birds well.
Yeah, I remember seeing before that there was this big shift sort of right after the Cretaceous extinction, where some of the birds that eventually evolved into things like crows were starting to get much bigger brains. So there was something that tipped the scales after the Cretaceous Paleogene boundary that made them really get a lot smarter, probably, but really just bigger brains.
It does seem like if they've got bigger brains, they probably were smarter.
Yeah. At the very least, they had better senses.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's two types of growth in dinosaurs.
Brain growth and skull growth.
Yeah. I was thinking more growth over a long period of time, millions of years, and then growth in a lifetime of a dinosaur.
That too.
This next paper I found really interesting. It's that scientists are cautioning how we estimate sizes and body shapes of extinct animals. And you have to be careful what animals you compare them to come up with these estimates.
Yes.
This was published by Joel Gayford and others in Ecology and Evolution. And as we talk about on this show, a lot of extinct animals, especially dinosaurs, are known from incomplete fossils. So when you're trying to reconstruct their bodies, you have to compare the fossil specimen to other animals to kind of fill in the gaps. And you can use either living animals or extinct animals where you've just got more fossils that are preserved. But there's a lot of limitations here, and that can lead to controversies and inaccuracies, which has this downstream effect because it can affect later studies because those studies might use the inaccurate depictions.
I see. So it can compound because if you estimate your dinosaur size based on the wrong assumptions, and then someone looks at your estimate for their dinosaur size, then you can just have bad data following bad data.
It's kind of like a game of telephone.
Mm-hmm.
Although I don't know how much it changes if you're able to cite directly.
Yeah.
But yeah, body size is important to know because it helps us figure out an animal's ecological niche, like what they ate, how they moved, how they reproduced, the predator and prey relationships, for example. So for this paper, they actually didn't look at dinosaurs. They looked at 4 case studies of marine megafauna, big animals that lived in the water. Dunkleosteus, Helicoprion, Otodus, also known as Megalodon, and Perucetus. And they represent a range of body sizes, niches, and geological time intervals. Dunkleosteus, for example, lived in the late Devonian. It was a placoderm, a bony fish with armor and guillotine-like jaws, or maybe guillotine. I've heard it pronounced both ways.
Yeah.
And it was found to be much stockier and shorter than previously thought, which we've talked about on this show, although I think we might have talked about it in I Know Paleo.
I think it was I Know Paleo. Yeah, because it had always been assumed that basically these jaws, by the size of them, they stretched out a typical sort of fish shape behind it. And they were like, oh, it was,
a ginormous fish.
Super long. And then they discovered, oh, wait, we actually think that they were really stocky. They were a lot shorter proportionally than what you see in a lot of modern fish. So maybe it was only half or a third the length of these previous estimates.
Yeah, very different. Then we've got Helicoprion, which is from the Permian, and that's a jawed fish. It's the one with the rolled up teeth. I like to think of it as it looks like a spiky Cinnabon.
Yeah, I guess so. I don't know what I think of it as. I just think of it like a conveyor belt sort of spiraling out, so that it's just going to have continuous more teeth.
Oh,
But I think it actually kind of goes the other way. It like whirls
kind of
into
swirls, yeah,
maybe more like a whirlpool situation while
maybe.
descending into the middle.
Or if you're constantly thinking of food like me, a Cinnabon.
Yeah.
But it was found to have a shorter lower jaw and a shorter body than we used to think.
Oh, just like Dunkleosteus.
Yes. Then there's Otodus, which lived in the mid-Miocene to early Pliocene. It's a shark with gigantic teeth. The species name is Megalodon. That's why I said that earlier. It was found that it actually wasn't a fast swimmer and it was more slender than previously thought.
Really?
Mhm.
So less great white sharky.
Yeah. Still gigantic teeth, though. And then Parusetus is from the late Middle Eocene, and it's a large archaeocete. Archaeocetes are ancient whales. They're early cetaceans, and cetaceans include whales, dolphins, and porpoises. And that one was also found to be lighter than previously thought.
It's just like dinosaurs. They all seem to shrink over time.
Yeah.
I always feel like when they find these new animals, there's a lot of enthusiasm. It's like, imagine how big it could be. And then you look a little more closely at it and it's like, well, maybe not quite that big, actually.
Well, so they talk about that in the paper a little bit, that there's this tendency to overestimate size. And sometimes it's because there's a pressure to make it seem bigger, to get more public interest, or you fear burning bridges in the academic community, or museums restricting access to specimens, just to name a few reasons.
Interesting. I hadn't thought of those before.
Me either. And then sometimes you also get a backlash, as they say, quote, from the ever-growing fan communities of prehistoric organisms on the internet.
Yeah. I remember that when Dunkleosteus was found to be a lot smaller. I've seen it with some sauropods too, where it's like, that's my favorite. What do you mean it's not 100 feet long?
Yes, so that can make it difficult when you're trying to figure out the size of an animal. But knowing, or getting closer at least, to their actual sizes helps us better understand gigantism and body size evolution of animals. So the paper, they said the issue isn't that size estimates need to be revised sometimes, just that there's a big difference in size estimates for some animals, because sometimes an estimate is twice as big as another for the same animal, and that can really affect our understanding of that animal. So you have to be careful what you use as proxies when you're trying to fill in those gaps.
Yes. I found this to be by far the most challenging part of writing a book about dinosaurs, where we needed to put in our facts about the size of the dinosaurs, deciding what single number to put for an estimate for the length of a dinosaur. I lost some sleepless. I had some sleepless nights over that one.
Yeah.
Because it just summarizing an entire animal down to one length estimate and one weight estimate is so challenging.
Yes. Well, you think about humans, we have a wide range of sizes.
Yeah. And a lot of times you can't tell, because what I've found very often is people will give a range of size estimates. So they'll say, oh, it was somewhere in the 5 to 7 meter range. But then sometimes what happens is people will say, oh, it was up to 7 meters long. It's like, well, really what they were saying is we think it was about 6 plus or minus 1 meter. They weren't saying that within the population they ranged from 5 to 7 meters. They were saying, we don't know how big it was. It was somewhere in the 5 to 7 meter range. So finding the primary sources where the actual estimates come from, or better yet, if you can find the actual individual bones and see how big they are and do a consistent analysis comparing different members within these dinosaur groups, then you can kind of see, okay, well, if I'm saying Stegosaurus is 30 feet long and I'm saying Kentrosaurus is 20 feet long, but they had the femur that was the same length, they should probably have a much closer length estimate.
We'll see what kind of feedback we get when the book comes out.
Yeah. There's a couple where I wonder what people will say.
Yeah. But that's a nice segue to our book segment, which we will get to in just a moment. But first, we're going to take a quick break for our sponsors. So thank you, Garrett, for that nice segue into our book segment.
It was unintentional, but I can pretend it was intentional.
Yeah. I've mentioned before, we've gotten to read a lot of dinosaur books lately, and thank you to the authors and publishers who've sent them our way. And I just wanted to mention a couple more this episode, specifically the nonfiction dinosaur books, because so far we've talked about kids' books and fiction books. And of course, we can't leave out the nonfiction books. There's probably more nonfiction dinosaur books than fiction or kids' dinosaur books. Oh, maybe not kids. That's hard to say.
But most kids' books are nonfiction dinosaur books.
True. I'm talking about nonfiction books for adults. Stay tuned. We will also be talking very in depth soon about a particular nonfiction book. And in fact, we'll be doing our own version of a book club around it. We'll be sharing more details.
Yeah, we're going to try out a book club. That'll be fun.
Yeah. All right. So the first book I want to mention is A History of Dinosaurs in 50 Fossils by Paul Barrett, which I think is a really good overview and a nice focus on the fossils. In the book, it talks about what is a dinosaur, as well as the origins and history of dinosaurs, like their rise and fall, if you will. Now I just think of the Steve Brusati book. It also goes over the main types of dinosaurs, dinosaur biology, like how they breathed and walked and what their brains looked like. And each chapter focuses on a single dinosaur fossil. It's not a definitive list, but it reflects the author's interest, as he says in the introduction.
Yeah, if it's only 50 fossils, you're not going to be able to cover that many dinosaurs.
Yeah. But they include Megalosaurus, Mentelosaurus, Herbivorous, Coelophysis, Mesospondylus, Pantodraco, which is a pretty newly discovered one, just to name a few of the fossils.
That's a lot of Southern United Kingdom, which makes sense for the author.
Yes. But then, of course, you've also got famous ones like Stegosaurus, Triceratops, Diplodocus, Spinosaurus, Maiasaura, Tyrannosaurus rex. There's a whole chapter called End of an Era. And it talks about the history of when the fossil was found and what we've learned from studying it. It's got really nice paleo art as well as images of the fossils.
Yeah, and it's a good answer to Ryan the biochemist question. We had an episode a couple of weeks ago where they asked about a book where you could see the actual fossils rather than just reconstructions. And this book, I think, fits that bill pretty well.
Yeah. Yeah, like there's a cool Coelophysis photo in its death pose. There's fossils of Niosasaurus, which I don't think we often see pictures of that one.
It's pretty incomplete.
Yeah. There's a beautiful Tyrannosaur egg and the inside of it, which is now filled with brightly colored agate.
Nice.
Had to bring that one up.
I think that's the one. Is that the one that was in their collection at the Natural History Museum in London, and then they discovered that it was a dinosaur fossil?
Yes. It's a pretty cool one. And then the next book I want to mention is called Macroevolution's Reflections on Natural History, Paleontology, and Stephen Jay Gould by Bruce S. Lieberman and Niles Eldridge. It's a book of 13 essays, and it examines how paleontology intersects with pop culture, philosophy, music, and the history of science. And it's all with an eye on the career and legacy of Stephen Jay Gould, who's known for his science and popular science, mainly 300 essays in the Natural History magazine. And in terms of evolutionary biology, he developed, along with Niles Eldridge, the theory of punctuated equilibrium, where evolution has these long periods of evolutionary stability that's infrequently punctuated by swift periods of branching off.
Yeah, it's really interesting.
It is. So the authors knew Gould really well. They say so in the preface. They worked together for decades. And the essays, they're easy to read. They weave together science with personal stories. The first essay, for example, is called The Three Musketeers of Macroevolution. Although it sounds like that caused some trouble because, I quote, never join a gang, especially in academia.
There are kind of gang-like groups in academia sometimes.
Yeah. So there's all kinds of references, ranging from Steven Tyler from Aerosmith to Ernest Shackleton, the Antarctic explorer, to the Mighty Mighty Bosstones, Immanuel Kant, The Lion King, Beavis and Butthead, Jaws, all kinds of ways to tie it back to paleontology.
Sounds like a good book.
Yeah, it was definitely entertaining.
I might have to read it. Sabrina reads most of the books that we get because she reads so much faster than me.
You eventually read them too.
Yeah, just takes me a while.
If you ever have a book in audio form, that's the way to get Garrett to consume it quickly.
I'm all about those audiobooks. Also, sometimes I get my various apps to read me text so that I can get through it faster.
All right, and now on to our dinosaur of the day, Suzhousaurus, which was a request from Paleo Mike 716 via our Patreon and Discord, so thanks. It was a Therizinosauroid dinosaur that lived in the early Cretaceous in what's now China. in the Xiagou formation and the Zhonggou formation. To me, it looks really vulture-like, but obviously supersized, with the neck and the head. Well, it doesn't have a bald head, but it's just the way it's kind of standing in the paleo art is kind of vulture-like, but it's also kind of skeksis-like
Yeah, I think skeksis is a good description.
from Dark Crystal.
Although a lot more people probably know what a vulture looks like than a skeksis.
You never know. Maybe we should explain what a skeksis is.
Yeah, how do you even describe what a skeksis is? It's basically a dinosaur in the Dark Crystal, which is a Jim Henson movie and later TV show, but they're sort of creepy creatures that are sort of featherless, but it's sort of, to me, it's kind of implied that they're decaying, kind of. So it's like they're missing their feathers, not because they're non-avian dinosaurs, but because they've just lost them because they're not doing so well. But yeah, they have big arms and big claws and stuff. And I think that does make them pretty Therizinosaurus-like.
Yeah, I think also the paleo art that I saw of Suzhousaurus makes it look a little hunched. But Suzhousaurus, in life didn't really look like a skeksis in that I don't think it looked like it was decaying.
Yes. We don't really know what it looked like with all its stuff on it, but it did probably not have tons of huge feathers on it, although it did have sort of bird-like proportions, sort of roughly, kind of like an ostrich or something with a longer tail, but you would have been able to see its big fingers rather than them being covered in wing feathers.
Right, and it had very long arms and claws, and it walked on two legs, and it had a long tail. Being a Therizinosauroid, it was an herbivorous theropod, which I think that's partly why I like this group so much. Because usually you think theropods, think carnivores.
Yep, it adds to the weirdness.
Yeah.
It's double weird because it looks like one of the most ferocious theropods because it has these huge claws, but it turns out that it probably just wanted to eat plants.
Yep.
And maybe they were more for defense. We don't know for sure because some herbivores are pretty ferocious, but it wasn't being ferocious to eat things.
Yes. And fun fact, Therizinosaurs were first thought to be giant turtle relatives.
Yeah.
Which is very different from what we think now.
Yeah, they thought the claws were like flippers.
Yes. So Suzhousaurus was large. It was estimated to be up to 20 feet or 6 meters long and weigh over 3 tons. And it helps show that Therizinosauroids got large early on. It also had one of the longest known upper arm bones of any theropod. I guess a lot of theropods, non-avian, should say, when we talk about them, we talk about their short arms. Suzhousaurus had a wide body. It probably waddled and had a large belly, as well as robust legs and a short tail, long claws and a long neck, and a beak. And it may have had some feathers. That's based on its relative Beipiaosaurus having been found with feathers. Its vertebrae weren't that light. Like, they weren't really pneumatized or hollow. Maybe that's why it probably waddled.
I'm guessing the waddling probably had to do with the wide gut and the shorter legs.
Yeah, that would make more sense. The type species is Suzhousaurus megatherioides.
Sounds like Megatherium, like the big ground sloth.
Well, that's what it refers to, is that it looked like the giant ground sloth, Megatherium.
That's another good way to describe it, in addition to skeksis.
Yeah.
Ground sloth.
All kinds of fun ways to describe this one. And the genus name means Suzhou lizard. It refers to Suzhou, which is the old name for the Jiuquan area where the fossils were found. There were 2 specimens found during fieldwork in 1999 and 2004, and then it was described in 2007 by Da-Ching Li and others. So if you put it all together, Suzhousaurus megatherioides means giant sloth-like reptile from Suzhou. The authors said that Suzhousaurus might be the same as non-Xiagou, that's in quotes, bolini, which is a Therizinosauroid named earlier that was found in the same area, but it's known from very few fossils, so it's hard to compare the two.
And maybe the fact that there were so few fossils made them put it in quotes because they're a little spurious on whether or not it's valid.
Seems so. The holotype of Suzhousaurus is a partial skeleton. No skull was found. It includes a right upper arm, right shoulder, partial ribs, parts of the hips, and 10 back vertebrae, 10 backbones. And then a more complete skeleton was described in 2008, and that includes more back vertebrae, the hips, part of the neck, and both femora, or thigh bones. Those are the fossils that were found in 2004. They know that both of these come from the same dinosaur, Suzhousaurus, because both of them, they found the left pubis and they found that they looked the same. They also found an isolated tooth. Suzhousaurus lived on a warm, semi-arid plain with shallow temporary lakes, and other dinosaurs that lived around the same time and place include ornithomimosaurs like Beishanglong, tyrannosauroids like Xiagou, the small neoceratopsians like Auroraceratops, as well as hadrosaurs and sauropods.
I love a big, weird therizinosaur, or Therizinosauroid, I should say.
Me too. Especially when we can come up with all these comparisons like sloth or skeksis or vulture. And then I like having the juxtaposition with, like we do today with our fun fact, which is the smallest known Microraptor that had a thigh bone less than 5 centimeters or 2 inches long. Just so different.
It's very small.
This was published in Historical Biology by Ranwei Wang and Rui Pei. They studied this nearly complete skeleton. It includes most vertebrae, the complete tail, ribs, left arm, both legs, parts of the shoulder. The tail has 29 bones or 29 caudal vertebrae. The furcula, the wishbone, is boomerang shaped. I like that description.
Mm-hmm.
And then we've got the femur, the thigh bone, that's less than 5 centimeters long or almost 2 inches. So this is the smallest dromaeosaur individual known from the Xiagou biota so far.
Okay. The smallest raptor from the Xiagou biota, which is, it's not like, oh, that's an asterisk. That's just some small niche area. The Xiagou biota is where most of these bird-like dinosaurs are found. At least it's the biggest spot where you'll find all these.
Yes, and Microraptor is one of the most common dinosaurs found there. So out of all the Microraptors so far, this is the smallest one.
Out of, I think, hundreds.
Yes. Although in the paper they said that a lot of Microraptors have been found, but not many have been described or reported. So I'm wondering if there's some even smaller ones in there.
Yeah.
It was a juvenile, this smallest known one. It was less than 1 year old based on histology. There's some fusion in the hip area, though, whereas some other parts of the skeleton are unfused, like in the shoulders, ankles, and some of the back vertebrae. And the authors caution, well, this means that you can't just use looking at bones, skeletal fusion, seeing the bones that are fused to decide if an individual is a juvenile or an adult Microraptor, and you should use histology when possible.
It's just not always possible because histology means cutting into the bones, and not everybody wants you to cut up their fossils. Sometimes looking at fusion is the best you can do. That's
true.
And even in this one, the vertebrae aren't fused, so there's still some clues.
That's true. But interestingly, the holotype of Microraptor Zhouyanus was thought to be an adult or subadult, and that's based on fused bones in the hips.
Oh, I see. I see where they're coming from now.
Mm-hmm.
If you're looking at just one part of the skeleton being unfused or fused, the other parts of the skeleton could be different, telling a different story, so you get misleading results.
Right, because in this case, if they didn't do histology and they just looked at the fusion in the hip area, you might think, wow, Microraptor could grow really small.
Or name a new species.
Yeah.
Or a new genus, Nanoraptor.
Yeah. And then there was one comment on the dinosaur mailing list that the fusion in the hip bones early on could help show that Microraptor was able to run at a young age, and it could maybe run just as well as an adult Microraptor.
Sort of showing priorities, the things that fused first because it needed to get there in the development.
Also, its first toe was elevated and not reversed, so that also shows that as a juvenile, Microraptor wasn't better suited to be in the trees. It's possible it didn't live any differently from the adults, since adult Microraptor don't seem to have any special adaptations for climbing trees.
So interesting ideas too.
Yeah. Things we know from the Microraptor.
Mm-hmm.
Well, that wraps up this episode of I Know Dino. Thank you for listening. Stay tuned next week. We'll have even more dinosaur news for you. And in the meantime, especially if you have a cool dino project going on, consider joining our Patreon, patreon.com/iknowdino.
And if you're already a patron, share it in that newsletter channel.
Yes. Thanks for listening, and until next time.